World War I propaganda, lengthening and brutalizing the total war to end all wars.
What is propaganda? Propaganda is the direction and control of public opinion for certain ends. This is primarily achieved through means of media. Propaganda was first used widely during World War I. Although it took on many forms, it was most effective throughout the war through the work of the popular press, or posters. Propaganda was originally used for the purpose of recruiting men to fight in the war as well as gaining the support of women and other members of the home front. The general objective for the use of propaganda during World War I was to censor, modify, and simplify information to meet government objectives. It was the driving force that led World War I to become a total war. There were many uses for propaganda that reflected the objectives of the government. The first use was for recruiting men to fight as well as gaining public support for the war on the home front. The posters often urged non-fighting citizens to buy war bonds and stamps. A second use of propaganda during World War I was to encourage troops in battle and uplift members of the home front. The government would often provide photos like this one to the public to make it seem like their country was winning. On the opposite hand, a third use of propaganda was to discourage enemy troops. Posters were made to exploit the enemy's mistakes and make them out as evil. In other words, dehumanize them. The fourth and final use of propaganda during World War I was to make the war seem less serious. Posters would often depict smiling, clean soldiers in organized trenches. In a similar sense, propaganda was used to make the war seem almost over. A popular belief at the beginning of the war was that it would be, quote, over by Christmas. As the war continued, however, governments began to refer to it as the war to end all wars.
To stiffen the will to win, mass propaganda was used for the first time.
This propaganda, they told us about them killing women and children and one thing and another. They had a lot of propaganda about that there. The Hun, you know, they called him. And how he'd go through these villages when he'd capture them and kill all the people off and that there. That's the stuff that they told us.
Wir waren wütend über diese Diffamierung.
We were furious about this
Wir haben
slander.
sie immer als bösartige.
We always said that it was evil propaganda,
Wir hatten das
and we
Gefühl,
felt that we
dass
Germans
wir
were
Deutsche
powerless to
nicht
answer
in
back.
entsprechender Form antworten konnten.
Multiple techniques were implemented in World War I propaganda in order to achieve the goal of the provided information. One popular technique was the use of symbolism. Specific people or ideas were linked to positive or negative icons. The most popular technique utilized in World War I propaganda was playing on people's emotions. Governments often referred to the information presented in propaganda as the ideas, quote, of the people. The posters commonly appealed to a sense of shame, with lines similar to, everyone else is doing it, are you? Another emotion that was easily exposed was fear. The posters would say that something terrible would happen in the near future unless you did something about it. A third technique implemented was the use of specific facial expressions and body language. Soldiers were depicted as happy and sometimes powerful or dominant in order to make the war seem less brutal or make it seem as though certain troops were winning. On the other hand, posters sometimes appealed to sadness and remorse. They would depict people crying, screaming, dying, or, in this case, drowning with a child.
Propaganda had a significant impact on the length and brutality of World War I. Although it led to the expectation of an early victory, it in fact lengthened the war, as both sides continued to believe that the other would soon fall. Troops, women, and other members of the home front became inspired, and battles became more gruesome. as both sides continued to become increasingly determined. In the end, by urging enlistment and gathering support on the home front, propaganda turned World War I completely into a total war.